what's powerful about student setting goals and tracking their progress is that they do it, right? The workload should be on them, not on you as the teacher. For you, it should be mostly setup and then checking in on them, guiding them along, and that kind of thing. And because if students are just doing this out of compliance, it's not going to be as effective for them, like it really needs to be like personalized.
I'm Nikki Herda, and this is Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms, a podcast where we celebrate our state's educators and explore the future of learning. Bright is brought to you in part by MEMIC Insurance Company, insuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit memic.com/quote to see how much you can save. In today's episode of Bright, I chat with Sam Sicilia, an instructional coach and former classroom teacher for Waverly Community Schools, who shares his top 3 strategies for setting and tracking goals with students. Well, hi, Sam. Thanks for joining me today for the Bright podcast. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're trying a new thing this season, and I'm asking everybody if they could tell me about the most interesting thing that they're doing in their position right now. And I was wondering what comes to mind for you.
Well, right now, I'm an instructional coach, but I've been in the classroom for many years. And so I'm working with teachers and, trying to help students take ownership of their learning. It's something that it was a struggle before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it became I feel like students became very passive. It was just like school is just something that happens. And so, something that worked well for me in the past was doing grade tracking, and goal setting and getting students to do that, not just have their grade be something that just shows up on a screen, but looking at it, documenting it, and then graphing it. That's the most interesting thing I'm trying to help. I'm helping some teachers right now start that in their classrooms with their students.
Can you tell me about a moment that you vividly remember just falling or re-falling in love with education?
Well, when I wanted to go into education, or once I was already in education?
I guess that you could say, when you were in education, if it affirmed that choice, right?
Yeah, because early on, you're just trying to stay above water, and so it was I never thought man, I hate teaching. There were times where I was like, man, I can't wait for summer to come, I can't wait to not have this group, on a daily basis. But, over time what I learned about myself was that so much is out of your control, but what happens in your classroom is in your control. And so I felt like that less and less as I got more experience, which I guess probably makes sense. But, a lot of teachers will say oh, this group is a tough group. And I was started to get to these points where some teachers would say, oh man, that was a really rough group that year. And I was like, were they? They seem okay. I don't know. Suddenly the groups that other people were struggling with, I was doing okay. It wasn't like I didn't have my struggles, but they didn't seem more difficult than others. And so I think that was some personal growth there. Right around the same time, there was a lot of talk of our students really need some more guidance and some more support social emotionally. And so a couple of teachers, myself included, pushed to do building wide, a mentoring program. And this is actually really where that grade tracking that we were talking about really came from. It wasn't, we did in class grading, grade tracking for specific skills and stuff, but the stuff that I really found success with was really tied to mentoring. So, all right, I'm going to meet with students. Before we meet, why don't you reflect on where you're at, and then we'll talk about where you're at, what your goals are, and like you said, what does it take to reach that goal? What do you need to do? And a lot of that was just guiding the student through it, they, especially, I'd be talking to them about classes that weren't my own. I would have, these are students that I had for English, but then they had other teachers and they were my homeroom group, right? But we were in teams. So it was all students I also had for English, but we'd be talking about their other classes. And I don't know what's going on in that class. So like, I'm just kind of helping them. Like, what does it take? Like, what's really bringing your grade down? Just having the conversations to help the student look at that grade and make it something more than just a random letter, like, all right, well, what is it actually reflecting? And if you want a different grade, what does it take to achieve that? Now, when we talked about my own class, I could obviously get more specific, but when I started mentoring students, it kind of clicked for me a little bit how much we can teach the best lesson in the world, but if they're not in the right mindset to receive it, then it's a lot of like wasted energy, wasted effort. And so I always saw that as the mentoring part as kind of an investment to like, if we can get students to buy in a little bit to the system and to feel like they can have some success, then we're going to have more success in everything else that we do. And so I didn't mind putting the time and the effort into it. I know for some people it was a struggle because it was, it feels like extra work sometimes, but like I said, it was kind of an investment. So I think when I started doing that and getting to know some of my students on a different level than I had before, like scheduling time. All right, we're gonna sit down for 10 minutes, just me and you, in the corner of the room while everybody else is working independently, and we're gonna have a conversation, and we're gonna do that. Originally I wanted to do it once a week, and then it turned into once every 2 or 3 weeks, but still, it was better than I wasn't doing that at all before. So, that really, I would say it reinvigorated me. I don't know if that matches that description of falling in love with teaching, but.
I hear what you're saying about how it's different, when you get a grade versus when you achieve a goal. It's kind of like in a different experience for the student, like it motivates them differently. Am I getting that right? And could you say more about that?
Yeah, I think, when I say like they experience school with, as a passive thing, it's just something that happens, like it's happening around them, and there's a underlying, sense of powerlessness there that like, it's not a grade that I earned. It's a grade my teacher gave me. And just changing that mindset a little bit to like, the actions that you take as a student affect your grade. I mean, it sounds obvious, but based on, behaviors you see from students, clearly many students don't truly believe that. It's just something that happens, and so giving them some tools to visualize like their progress. I think that's really helpful. And there's a lot of research that backs that up. If you look at like Robert Marzano books, they talk a lot about, student tracking their own progress and things like that. And that's where a lot of that came from for me. We started looking at, standards-based grading and things like that a few years ago. And maybe you're never fully there, but that was something that whether you're doing standards-based or not, you can have students track their grades and you can get some of those benefits of students taking ownership of that grade, and understanding that it's a reflection of their progress and not just, points, if you will. I've always done goals in my classroom, but it used to be just kind of like, what do you feel like, like, oh, what's your goal for this class? I want to get an A. Like, okay. Well, what does that actually mean? And so giving that a little more context and giving them more information to go by, like, all right, like, here's where you're at now. Like, all right, where do you want to get to, or where do you want to stay at?
Could you give me an example? Like, if you can't think of one from like a real student off the top of your head, you could use a hypothetical, but just like, what is an example of a goal that you've seen, the kind of goal that motivates a student, that they can feel that progress?
I've been an English teacher most of my career, and so like no matter what grade level you teach, you're teaching theme. Like theme's always there, like, and they never quite fully grasp it. Like it's I taught high school, it still sort of struggled with it, but obviously the younger guys struggled more. And it's like, all right, well I can determine a theme. Like can you do that? Do you think you can do that easily? Can you do that some of the time? And giving them some kind of baseline data, like a pretest, and then setting a goal having them set a goal for like, all right, but like how much growth do we want to see here? Usually their goal is to show mastery, But there's some students that, they really struggle if they wanted to set a goal for, getting part or most of the way to mastery. That would be fine too. So, I mean, I think I had a lot of students that it just became the norm for us to kind of pre-test each standard or each learning target, and then set a goal based around that and track their progress. So I think it worked well for actually a lot of students. I mean, some students would rather do less than more, as far as work, like, it feel like it's extra work, but, trying to get through to them that it's going to benefit you. But, by the end, I didn't get too much of that pushback from students. It was usually pretty easy to get them to at least comply. And then over time, it just, it was just part of the process. It was part of our routine.
What would you tell a student if they said, like, why do I have to do this? And they perceived it as extra work. What were the kinds of things that you would tell them?
That it's really about tracking your own learning and being aware of it. Like, let's make your grade more specific. Let's make your grade reflect the learning that's actually happening. If we can get more specific, you can be more aware of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and where you need to improve, like what areas you need to improve on. And so that's where I would focus is help me help you improve, and not just say we're doing good. And usually that was a conversation with higher achieving students. Because some of the other students, I think, like if you're getting C's, like you have room to improve. So like they're not as much pushback there, even if they're just going through the motions. But some of the higher achieving students, it was like, yeah, you get an A, right? You probably will get an A, but like that doesn't mean you know everything there is to know. It doesn't mean you've mastered everything. And so just being transparent about where they're at, I think helps a lot in giving them realistic expectations, number one, but also not sending them out into the world with this idea of like, I got all A's, I must know everything. And then getting to the next level, whether it's high school or college, and not being prepared, like finding out that like, oh wait, I do have all these gaps in my learning that I didn't realize were there. And so like, that's how I would sell it to them is to let's find out where your gaps are so you're not surprised later.
I could see, and I'm curious if this is reflective of your experience with students, but I almost wonder if the students who are getting lower grades, if that could be a very empowering thing. Because, so the thing I'm thinking of is, I taught first year writing when I was in grad school for a couple of years, and I would ask students early on, like, what their relationship with writing is, right? And where that came from. And almost every time, the ones that didn't like writing said, oh, I had, I got D's in English, or I got, the red pen. Yeah, they took
my red pen, my paper.
Yes. And so I thought I sucked, right? Or I think I suck, basically. Yeah. And I wonder if this goal setting and tracking can allow them to see, like, yes, I have a C, but I am good at this one thing. I'm really good at X. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think so. Like breaking it down into like just 4 categories as opposed to like, the whole 100-point thing. Like almost everybody is partially there, right? On a 4-point scale of like 1 being you just don't get it, 2 meaning you partially get it, 3 meaning you get it, mastery, and 4 being you're above and beyond, like exceeding mastery. Like any student that tries is probably going to be able to get a level 2 in almost any standard, with some work. And so for some of those students that really struggle to find success, that like were, be failing all their classes. Even seeing that was like kind of a positive, kind of a, like, oh, I know I can get to there. And it felt more achievable, even if they were really far behind and really low. And then usually, they would master some of the skills, and you could have that conversation like, hey, like you're good here. We just need to work on this. And it makes those conversations so much more productive with, if you talk to a student one-on-one. It's like, if you're just telling them, oh, you're failing and you're missing all these assignments, like, okay, like, but what skills do we need to work on changes the conversation. It's not, it changes it from student-teacher relationship, and it's like, it's not the teacher and the student, it's the student and the learning, the student and the learning targets. And as a teacher, you're just kind of like helping them navigate it, almost more like a coach kind of thing. I mean, obviously you're doing the instruction and stuff, but it just takes away, that teacher as the scapegoat kind of thing. Like, oh, the teacher, it's like, that's not about me and you. It's just about this. Like, if we can focus on the learning, and it puts the focus where it should be, which is on the learning. So, the high achieving students, I think, are the ones that struggle the most because it's a little more honest, and it's like, if it's only about getting the A, then it's like, I just want to get the A. I don't care how, and then nobody says that usually, outright, but it's like, that's kind of the feeling. That's the subconsciously. It's like, I just want to get the A. If I got the A, I'm good. And if you give them feedback where it's like, well, you're not actually at an A here, I've experienced it cause anxiety for a lot of students. But even then, it leads to a good discussion of like, you can get there. Like, this is just where you're at. Like, you could still get that A, but here's what you need to do it. Like, here's what you need to work on. And for those students, it's a much more productive conversation.
Right. And even if it's hard, which I'm sure it is, I'm kind of projecting, like I said, based on the type of student I was, like I said, but there is a little bit in that anxiety. It's I need to be good. I need to be told I'm smart. I need to succeed, and so that itself is kind of rooted in an anxiety. And so if you're eventually you're going to have to you're eventually going to fail at something. You can't, that just is true as a human. And so if you can learn to have that, it sounds really, I'm hearing a lot of that growth versus fixed mindset.
Yes.
If you can learn that early on, you are saving yourself some pain down the road. And that's what school learning should be about too. So.
Yes. Yeah. And that's part of that mindset shift that I think needs to take place regardless of what systems people have in place. It's just, is school somewhere where you go to learn and grow, or is it just, somewhere where you get judged, and it's, trying to separate self-worth from, or even like worth that other people place on you from school, it's something I learned pretty early on. Cause I think growing up, I probably did place a lot of value there. Like, oh, if you get good grades, you're smart and you're good and you're a good kid. And it's obviously, it's far more nuanced than that.
I'm Nikki Herda, and you're listening to Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. Bright is brought to you in part by MEMIC Insurance Company, ensuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit memic.com/quote to see how much you can save. Today, I'm chatting with Sam Sicilia, an instructional coach and former classroom teacher for Waverly Community Schools. Up next, we dive into Sam's top 3 strategies for setting and tracking goals with students. So today we are wanting to dig in a little bit to 3 ways to set and track goals with your students. To kick us off, do you want to give us your first tip in this area, Sam?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to set aside time in your class schedule to regularly set goals and track progress. So if you're just talking about grade tracking, if you could do it once a week or even once every 2 weeks, but like regularly scheduling time where students are reflecting on where they're at and looking at their progress, and having them document that in some way. It takes some time, and you obviously don't want to spend, too much time on that because you're cutting into instructional time. But I think it can help with the instructional stuff as well by getting more buy-in from students. And so it's kind of a balancing thing there. But if you don't set aside the time regularly, there's always going to be something that comes up that could be more pressing. And so that would be my number one tip. Schedule it, set a schedule and stick to it.
I'm curious, you mentioned the importance of scheduling time, setting time aside. When you were in the classroom doing this, just obviously it might look different for every teacher, but how did you do that? Like what part of the day or what part of your lessons did you set aside time to do this?
In my English classroom, it would be part of like the unit structure. So it would be, at the beginning of the unit, we'd go over the learning targets and and do some pre-tests to figure out where people are at and then set goals. But a really good time to do this for all classes is during like a homeroom or depending on what people have. And I've been in middle school and high school, and we've always had some kind of time set aside for this. Instead of just saying like, well, go ahead and work on your stuff. It's like, well, let's look at your grades. Let's document it. Let's set some goals, both long-term and short-term. It just kind of fits into that homeroom time, makes it more productive.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. What do you got for us for number 2?
All right. So my second strategy would be to focus on growth and continual improvement. I mentioned earlier pre and post tests, giving students something kind of tangible to look at to compare where they were, at one point to where they were after learning, keeping the focus on growth and less on just work completion. I find that, students at the high school and middle school level, it tends to just be, well, I did it, and it's like, well, how well did we do it? Or, oh, that's in the grade book. Well, now I'm going to do it. So that's worth points, so like helping to shift from just getting it done, like they're punching a clock, to can we grow? Can we focus on the actual learning that's taking place?
Just how much goes into everything. It gives you so much respect for what our educators do. So let's get your third tip here.
All right. So number 3 was utilize technology to streamline and lighten the load. Teachers already have a lot on their plate. You don't need to add more to it. Or if you do, then you need to take something else away. And so it's not like technology is going to solve this for you. I suppose it depends on the systems you have. But what I've never seen in the system that we use is like a way for students to look at like, oh, here's my grade data over time. You know what I mean? It's just like, here's my grade right now. What was it before? I don't know. And so, utilize whatever you already have, right? That's going to be the easiest way to get things rolling. Like if you have a system that would show that data, then absolutely use it. So see what's available already. But if not, you can find, a spreadsheet goes a long way. And I think I didn't use spreadsheets early on in my teaching. And then the more I looked at them, I'm like, man, this is phenomenal. Like there's so much you can do here. And students can get it, they need some training, teachers probably do too. I think they avoid it because it can be a little daunting. But if you have like a template and it's set up and things like that, like I use Google Sheets a lot, like whether it's Excel, Google Sheet, anything like that. But if you're talking about tracking things, like a spreadsheet is a good way to do it. But it doesn't have to be, you know what I mean? But you can do it on paper, but then it becomes like, all right, where does that paper go? Do I collect those papers? Do I have to go and so that's one of the things I'm kind of pointing at when I say use technology to streamline things and lighten the load, is that you don't need to add a ton to your plate. Because in the end, what's powerful about students setting goals and tracking their progress is that they do it, right? The workload should be on them, not on you as the teacher. For you, it should be mostly setup and then checking in on them, guiding them along, and that kind of thing. And because if students are just doing this out of compliance, it's not going to be as effective for them. It really needs to be personalized and so, yeah, I would utilize technology to do that. If you do even just a simple formative assessment, like a Kahoot or something like that, use that as a data point, have students, if it's something you're already doing, think about how you can incorporate those things, into this process of setting the goals and tracking progress.
Top tools, just if you want to just rattle off a few that come to mind. You already mentioned Google Sheets. You mentioned Kahoot. Any others that you would recommend?
I mentioned utilize what you already have. So see what your learning management system has that can help with this. Whatever reporting is available that that could help shed some light on student progress, I think would be helpful. I mean, we use Google Forms a lot. You know, it's easy to push out to the kids, but it's also easy to report back. Like you can have that sent to their email. You could, you know, have it imported to Google Classroom if that's what you're using. So yeah, utilize whatever your currently district's using. Like I think you can work with it, but you want to see what is it capable of, and then where do I need to like supplement that. And so any kind of formative assessment tool is going to be super helpful. Kahoot quizzes is really good. Like I say, Google Forms, stuff that's going to give you output, you know, like that can be tracked. It doesn't have to be a number necessarily, but it's easy to, all right, you got this score, like here's where you're at. And I would usually, you know, have them track things on like a 4-point scale. When I say Google Sheets, it was like one Google Sheet that they filled out every week, like one row was a week, and to be all their classes on one. And so that's what I'll share with you that you can share out. It's like, it's a pretty cool graph that you see over time. You know, each class is a different color and you see all the lines and you can see, you're like, oh, here's where they had a bad week because every class went dink. And then here's where they, you know, like you can really, like it paints a picture. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. If you can share anything like that.
I'll share like a student sample one that's already filled out so you can see it, but it's pretty straightforward.
All right. Can you tell me about a student who touched your heart and changed the way you teach?
I was just reminiscing with one of my coworkers about a student who came into my class. I was teaching 8th grade history at the time, so it was like U.S. history, and she was a special education student and had a long list of accommodations, and you know, like understandably so. And she had a lot going on, but I remember there was all these accommodations, and it didn't match what I saw in class. I understood why they had some of these accommodations, but the more I looked at them, like, I don't know if she just really likes history, but like she really seems to know her stuff. Like, so there were things in there, like she had to have her test read to her, and it was like, I'm gonna have you, like, we'll read the test for you, like that's not a problem, but like, why don't you try it on your own? We'll see what happens. Let's see. Ace the test, and I'm like, okay. So and then eventually it was like she was like one of my top students. And it wasn't anything I did necessarily, but it was more, she had just grown, you know what I mean? She had outgrown those accommodations that had been written for her probably years before and just kept getting passed on IEP at IEP. And eventually, you know, we had them changed, and she was, you know, and yeah, I mean, she was on a track to like maybe get a diploma or something. And then she ended up going to college and just all these other things. And we kept in touch a little bit through Facebook after she graduated. And it was like, it really just changed my perspective on things. Is like, number one, don't judge a book by its cover, you know, don't judge it by their past either, because, you know, we're all growing and changing. And it was just such a positive, heartwarming story, you know, to see her grow past the expectations that were set for her, you know, and that's not begrudging anybody that set those expectations. It was based on what they saw, and she just kind of defied the odds, I think. And it was, you know, I think, even physiologically, she overcame things. Like her brain developed more than they thought it would. It was just amazing to watch and to see her continue to grow even after I had her in class. So,
and that's what you want as a teacher, right? Like that's so neat to see that, because it sounds like even to her it was a surprise. You know, like she was like, oh wow, I don't need that. Oh my gosh, I can do it.
Yeah, it was cool.
All right. So very similar question, just a teacher that you had who had an impact on you and changed the way you teach.
I had a teacher, Mrs. Sutherland in Canton High School. And I had her for many classes, but she did video production. And I mentioned earlier, it might have been off camera, but that I taught a video production class, and I volunteered. I actually made the class based on that experience. And it was junior, senior year in high school. And, you know, we'd do like the school announcements, broadcasts, and things like that. But we do all sorts of fun stuff with it. And it was just, I don't know, seeing what teaching could be, you know, like it was just like, I learned a lot from that, but it more than just like the content of the class, which was not necessarily relevant to anybody's life, you know, unless you become a videographer or something like that. It was the teamwork, you know, like working with others, collaboration, the problem solving, you know, just we're working with like VHS tapes, you know, like we had, like to add titles, you had to like tape and then record on another one. And it was bonkers. But so long story short, Jan Sutherland, she's great. I think she's she was still teaching last time I saw her at my 20-year reunion. So she's got to be getting close to retirement. But yeah, she definitely inspired me to become a teacher.
I'd like to thank Sam for taking the time to share with us some of the wisdom he's acquired over his years as a classroom teacher and now as an instructional coach. I want to thank him for offering insight into strategies for empowering students to take ownership of their own growth and learning, rather than experiencing school as something that passively happens to them. And of course, I want to thank him for sharing his top 3 strategies for setting and tracking goals with students. 1, setting aside time in your class schedule to regularly set goals and track progress. 2, focusing on continual growth and improvement. And 3, utilizing technology to streamline and lighten the load. Without a doubt, it's challenging work to get students to take charge of their own learning. But with leaders like Sam forging our path forward, if there's one thing we're certain of, it's that the future is bright. Do you know someone who's an inspiring Michigan educator who should be featured on our show? Send us an email at bright@michiganvirtual.org to let us know who they are and why we should interview them. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. This podcast is produced by Herbie Gaylord, is hosted by me, Nikki Herda, and is shaped by many of our passionate and talented colleagues. Big thanks to Ken Durkin, Ann Perez, and Brandon Batista for their contributions to this episode. Bright is brought to you in part by MEMIC Insurance Company, insuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit memic.com/quote to see how much you can save. The Bright podcast is made possible by Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization that's leading and collaborating to build learning environments for tomorrow. Education is changing faster than ever. Discover new models and resources to move learning forward at your school at michiganvirtual.org.